We're going to finish our series today on desperate. What does it mean to be desperate before God? One of my all-time favorite quotes that I'll share with you in just a second on desperation. I got ahead of myself there. This is the title of the sermon this morning. Here we go. Go to the next one, fellas. There you go. What to do when crisis comes. What do you do when crisis comes? That's what we're going to talk about in this morning. Because if you've been reading through Psalm 107 over the last several weeks, you know there's a pocket of people that crisis came on them. A minute ago, I mentioned one of my all-time favorite quotes. It was from, of all people, Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson said this: "Every man has a plan until you hit him in the mouth." Every man. Now, I've never met Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is not a hero of mine, but when I heard that quote years ago, I absolutely love it because it's so true. I used to, this is going to be hard for some of you to believe, I used to box a little bit when I was in middle and high school. It didn't last long, praise the Lord. But I used to get to box with a guy that actually went on to the Olympics. I didn't get to box. He let me hit on him from time to time. Dwayne was much older. He would let us spar with him. And it was, if you've never boxed with an Olympic boxer, I will tell you it is life-altering. Literally a guy that went to the Olympics. But I'll never forget when I stepped into the ring with Wade Anderson, and Wade was my age, and Wade had no form, he had no tactic. Wade just wildly swung at you, and it's really hard to defend that because you don't know where it's coming from. I called him the windmill. He would put his head down and just take off coming at you, and there's you just either run or you buckle. And he hit me, and out of nowhere, and I was, boxing like I was supposed to be, like I was be taught, and he hit me, and I was confident right up until that moment that he hit me. And I was laying looking up at the lights, and I thought, if I get up, this is going to happen again. And that was, and I got up because I heard my daddy's voice in my ear saying, "You better get up, boy." And so I got up, and it happened again. And I was like, I can believe me or my daddy, and not now. My daddy's losing, and I got hit in the mouth, and I had a lot of strategy until Wade hit me in the mouth. So when I read that quote, it's true, isn't it? You can have all the desires you want. You can have all the good plans. You can talk about all the godly principles you want to talk about. You can talk about all the things that you would do. I tell you what I'd do in that situation, but until you're in the situation and life punches you in the mouth, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the mouth, don't they? That's true. I will say I love what Oswald Chambers said much better. Oswald Chambers said it this way: "When the darkness of dismay comes, endure it until it is over, because out of it will come the ability to follow Jesus truly." When the darkness of dismay comes, you endure it. You press on. You push through it. Because out of that, yes, he is so right. And that's why he's Oswald Chambers. Let's turn to Psalm 107 this morning. We're going to pick it up. You've read this psalm for several weeks. Now, here, I'm going to set it up for you. I've told you every week we do not have a lot of historical precedent on this psalm. We don't really know much of what was going on. We think it might have a lot to do with the exile or the Exodus, but that's still up for debate. But there are mirrors of that in this passage. But there are 4 different groups of people, and if you've missed any of these sermons, you need to go back across the 4 weeks in the podcast on iTunes and listen to them, because this psalm describes 4 completely different people or groups of people that went into desperate situations for very different reasons. And today we're seeing the 4th and final group. And he's talking about people that are in business, merchants, but they're just normal business people, just like you and just like me. Verse 23. "Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters. They have seen the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. And he spoke and he wrote, and the Bible says, he spoke and he raised up a stormy wind," verse 25, "which lifted up the waves of the sea. talking about the people in the boat, they rose up to the heavens, they went down to the depths. That paints the picture to me of really high waves. I've heard many mariners talk about over the years as I've watched documentaries that in massive sea storms, those swells can be 30, 40, 50 feet. I mean, it literally is that much flux. Can you imagine? Verse 26, they rose up to the heavens, they went down to the depths. Their soul, we know what the soul is, their soul melted away in their misery. They reeled and staggered like a drunken man and were at their wits' end. And then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. And he brought them out of their distresses. He caused the storm to be still so that the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad because they were quiet. And he guided them to their desired haven. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and his wonders to the sons of men. Let them extol him also in the congregation of the people and praise him at the seat of the elders. Now, there's a lot more that I could read there, but we just don't have time today. Today, we're going to talk about what to do when crisis comes. And I've got just a couple of key foundational truths to share with you this morning. I work really hard to share with these things as simple as I know how. And the first one I'll share with you is based on this psalm, is simply this: be careful. Are you hearing me? Be careful that you do not misinterpret situations God brings you. When you're in a crisis, hear me. When you're in a crisis, you be careful that you don't misinterpret the situations that God brings your way. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I want to look in verse 23. They were going about their normal day. I could ask for a show of hands, but it would be 100% in the room. There's many of you that have been going, you got up, you went to work, had your normal day, everything was going fine, and the day was way different when you came home, wasn't it? You got some news, somebody in your family lost a job, spouse told you they were leaving. The day started off, these people walked out to the ships. They were just normal business people. They got in, their commute was a dock. Instead of getting in their vehicle and going on 65 north, they went down to the port, went into their job, and by the day's end, everything had changed. Their world had imploded. They went down to the ships, those who do business. But I want you to look at something that is very, very, very important in this passage. It said, verse 23, those who do business on the great waters, they have seen the works of the Lord out on those waters, in his wonders in the deep. Look at verse 25, though. For he spoke and raised up a stormy wind. God brought the crisis. So when I tell you to be very careful how you interpret situations, be very careful. Because you see, in our Williamson County way, anything bad has to be from the devil all the time, 24/7. And friends, that's just not true. Now, you better listen to me really close or you're going to mishear me, misunderstand me, or even worse, misquote me on Facebook. All right? For about 99.2% of y'all, I wish you'd all get off Facebook, just for what it's worth, but anyway. No, I shouldn't have said that. Well, anyway, stay on it if you want to. I'm not telling you that God caused your cancer. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. But in verse 25, it says everything was going fine, and then he spoke, and a stormy wind came up. You see, sometimes God does things, and one of the things that we do as human beings, listen to me, we've conditioned ourselves to believe that for whatever reason, everything should make sense. I had a Hebrew professor one time that we were getting in this big debate. This was 20-something years ago, and my Hebrew professor looked just like Groucho Marx, if that helps you at all. But we were all in this debate over this Hebrew word. And Dr. Ellis just stopped the class and he said, fellas, listen to me. You're talking about a cosmic God with a cosmic vocabulary, trying to squeeze it down into a finite number of words that you can understand. In and of itself, that's problematic. We believe that everything should make sense. Why is this happening to me? It must be the devil. Maybe not. Maybe not. I didn't tell you that God was the author of evil. I didn't say that. But you have to understand something, you guys. To the Old Testament Hebrew, now listen to me. To the Old Testament Hebrew, Deuteronomic blessing and cursing were very common. To the Old Testament Hebrew, that read Deuteronomy and understood the Levitical law, they were not threatened. Their idea of God wasn't threatened, that God allowed things to come into their lives. See, but as Western Christians in 2018, we freak out when things don't go right, and we automatically ascribe it to the devil. And I'm telling you, you better be careful with that. You better be careful with that. So you just don't know. Sometimes God, for whatever reason, He doesn't owe me an explanation. Are you listening? He doesn't owe me an explanation, but He does things. In the days of antiquity, the people that worshiped the Asherah pole and Baal worshipers, they had multiple gods. They had the sun god and the moon god and the river god and the fire god and the fertility god and the money god. They had multiple gods. And people in those days, thousands of years ago, believed that the gods were capricious, that they messed with you. They were moody. That's why you had to pacify them all the time. Keep the gods happy. Go through all of the rituals so maybe the gods won't get mad at you. And so then Genesis comes into the scene, and it's a polemic against polytheism that says, no, there's one God, and He owns all of it. Don't be confused. And He's not moody. And He doesn't just bring punitive damage to your life when you step out of line. Aren't you glad? I'm glad. Some of y'all evidently don't mind it. I mind it, okay? I'm glad that our God isn't capricious. But the Bible says in verse 25 that He created the storm. Sometimes God brings things into our lives, but I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget it, and I want you to hear me, and I want you to hear me clearly. You do not get to see the wonders of the deep by sitting on the dock. You do not get to see the wonders. What does it say right there in verse 24? These businessmen who were merchants, what does it say about them? They have seen the works of the Lord and His wonders of the deep. Where did they see that? Where did they see it? Away from the dock, friends. You don't get to see the wonders of the Lord when you're tied to a dock. You don't. Look at how we pray over mission trips all the time. Oh God, keep us safe, keep us safe. Jim Elliott didn't pray that prayer. He said, let your glory be made known. I heard Beth Moore one time say something that really hit me deep in my heart. She said, we're obsessed with our children being safe all the time. And I pray that God, you would keep my children safe, but do not keep them safe from your glory. Well, I've got boys, and that's hard, isn't it? But you don't get to see the wonders of the deep tied to the dock. You don't. You never do. In fact, in verse 26, it says that when this storm came into our life that God initiated, they rose up to the heavens. They were literally tossed around. Their soul melted. It says in verse 27, they reeled and staggered. Literally, they had motion sickness. Their soul had motion sickness. Has your soul ever needed Dramamine? Mine has. It's tough. And look at what it says in verse 27. They reeled and they staggered like a drunken man, and they were at their wits' end. Do you know something about that word, wits' end? Oh, I think you do. You ever had a hard time going to sleep because you're at your wits' end? But I want to share something with you. That word does mean at the end of your wits. But you know what's fascinating about the language of that word? That it was tied to merchants historically. The historical aspect of that actual word, wits' end, was tied to merchants on the ships. And do you know that it doesn't mean they were at the place where I'm at my wits' end, I'm at my wits' end, I can't think, I can't see straight. No, that's part of that. But if you look deep in the roots of that word, it said, it implies they had lost, listen, they had lost the technical savvy to fix the problem. You ever been there? You're at the end of your talent. There was nothing they could do. The sea was so high, the waves were so strong, they were skilled mariners, and there was nothing they could do to exit the situation. They couldn't control it. They were literally at the end of themselves. You ever been there? I have. I've got 2 college degrees, a master's and a doctorate, and there's sometimes I feel like the dumbest person that's ever lived. Because I don't know how to fix some things, and I can't. And sometimes things happen to you that you have no idea why. Today I want to share a story with you. Cole Warren, come on up here, good man. This is one of my favorite people on planet Earth. This is Cole Warren. He's a good-looking dude. Well, let's see. Let me go. Hold on, Cole. There we go. Is this the one you wanted, TW? Cole, they won't bite. I do it every Sunday, I promise. Cole was like, I've never done this before. I said, it'll be all right. You'll get to do it again in an hour. Cole, you're what, 18 years old?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Cole is the son of Brett and Raquel Warren, and Brett Warren's one of my best friends in the world. Brett's a songwriter, and Raquel, well, Brett's really the husband of Raquel, really, is what works out as. But now, I first met Cole when he was probably in the 8th grade, maybe, something like that, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, something like that. When he was, you brought some stuff, I had to deliver some things to Michelle's class one day, and you were about seemingly that tall. Cole Warren he went to Franklin Classical School, and he was the first person I baptized at ClearView. And I wanted you to hear about something that happened in his life. He's never shared this, and he shared it with a few friends, but he's talked about it with me over the years, and it was very formative in his life. Cole you were the quarterback for. They got a picture of Cole. There you go. I love that. Does that not just look like a bunch of dudes about to graduate high school? Now, Cole, you're gonna tell us where you're going to go to school.
I'm going to Lipscomb University next year.
And what are you going to study?
Business management, I think.
I think. Spoken like a true 18-year-old. I think. Historically, you will not study that. You'll probably end up like a zoologist or something there. You know. But, Cole, walk us through. You were going about your normal day, and I think you were a junior.
Yes, sir.
Is that right? And then tell us, as the quarterback of the football team, tell us what happened. Hold that up there.
Okay. Not really sure where to start. Since I was 8 years old, I started playing football, and immediately it was my life. I loved it so much. Off season, I would work all season just for the next one.
Put a lot of time in.
Yeah, a lot of time, and my parents put in a lot of money. Thank you. But junior year, I was at, I guess, my physical peak. I was, really working hard. And at the time, I'd grown up a Christian my whole life, gone to Christian school, gone to church, Bible studies, all that. And I was just basically going through the motions. I didn't really apply it to life. I was just like, yeah, I'm a Christian,
Now, I remember when we were talking about it one day at Puckett, you said I kind of was the captain of my own ship.
Right.
I really was living how I wanted to.
Right, and I believed, but I was the captain of my own ship. I did everything. If I had a problem, I tried to take care of it myself. Anything that came up in life, whether it was good or bad, I wanted to do it. And the start of junior year, we had a scrimmage before, like 2 weeks before the first game.
So you're in preseason.
Preseason, don't even have the full playbook yet, all that. And about the 8th play in the scrimmage, I was playing defense, and my toe was dragging, and a whole pile came on me when I tackled the guy, and it broke my tibia in half. Which, if you don't know what a tibia is, if you haven't taken Mrs. Cruz's anatomy class, it's the big shin bone.
I refuse to take it. I won't do it.
But that ended the season quick. And
Cole, I'm curious. We haven't rehearsed this. When you were laying there, I can only imagine you knew that I'm done. I would think.
Well, I mean, it was a pain like no other. I've gotten hit hard before, but it was something different.
Something was
sure.
wrong.
Something was wrong, and I wanted to just take it back up and go in, but when I tried to get back up, and when I stepped on it, the whole leg just folded in, and it was bad. So.
And so, you and I were talking when you came to me, and you wanted to be baptized, and you shared some of these stories. And I've walked with Cole. I've known their family. They're very dear friends of ours, and so I knew some of the story. But you said something to me about the way you felt toward God, and it's hard. It was hard for you. And this is not, I know y'all may realize this. Like, it's easy for me to talk to a crowd, and I love it. But when you're sharing thoughts and feelings, it's really hard. So, but Cole, tell them what you told God because of that injury.
Well, I never doubted that God was real. I always knew He was real, at least. But I prayed to Him. I was, laying in bed, couldn't walk, could barely move, and I told God, I said, I hate you. I hate you because you ruined the only thing that I really care about. And I had to go through. I tried to navigate through the whole injury myself. I was telling myself, you only have 7 months left. You can do it. But I couldn't do it. And I eventually came to a point where I told God, I said, you win. And I said,
I'm sure
you take the wheel now.
I'm sure you are at a place. I mean, by the way, for you to tell God you hate Him, you've got some pretty big people behind you that said some of the same things, Jeremiah, so don't feel like you're left out. You've got, one thing I love about the Old Testament, it is amazing what you can say to God and get away with it. Because there's been some pretty amazing prophets that have said some bold stuff to God. Jeremiah said, you treated me as a maiden against her will, a virgin against her will. So, it's pretty impressive sometimes. And I've always said this, if you feel something about God, go ahead and tell him. He can take it, I promise. But it was in that point that you said when you finally gave up. Because when we've been reading through this psalm, Cole, if there's one thing we know is that deliverance is always tied to dependence. You see that always all through this psalm. Deliverance is tied to dependence. We know it. And when you and I met at Puckett's that morning for breakfast and you were talking to me about being baptized, there was another part of this story that came full circle. Tell them about that.
Just to start from I guess as far back as possible, when I just gave up and I was like, God, you're the only one that can take care of this. My leg didn't heal immediately. I couldn't walk all of a sudden or some miracle, but I had faith and I had hope. And
but you were mad, but you still had hope.
And I was mad, but I truly knew that God had it under control, and I knew that He was doing something with it. And rehab next season, everything went well. And the second to last game, I tore my ACL, senior year.
Senior year.
Yeah, and I don't know. Just so much. Just seeing myself the year before, it was a 180-degree turn. I tore my ACL. They said, rehab for 8 months. And I was like, okay, God, you're going to do something with this. I have faith, and I trust in you. Which is the total opposite of...
It's a long way from I hate you.
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I said, I love you, God. Thank you. I'm not perfect. Things weren't all, perfect. I still had, problems and stuff. But I really pursued Christ because He pursued me in my injury, and in both of them. And about 4 or 5 months later, I got baptized by Mr. Cruz, and I'm just so grateful that it happened because, to be honest, if I knew that would happen and I could go back in time, I would go through that again. I wouldn't sit out that play or something like that. I would absolutely do it again.
You told me that morning at Puckett's, you said, I really think had I not been hurt, I don't think I would have given in to God. You had no choice. You were at your wit's end. Mm-hmm. And he literally told me it took that entire process to drive me to where God wanted me to be. And that's tough. So how's the knee now?
It's good. It feels a little weird, but it works.
But your hair is great.
Thank you.
Your hair, I will tell you, he's got the best hair of any human I've ever met. That's not a joke. He's got the absolute best hair I've ever seen. Cole, I don't know why that happened to you, but the Lord, all through it, He formed, and you'll go through more. It won't be a broken, tibia. It'll be a broken something else, and sometimes it'll just be a broken heart. But you will look back on that experience, son, and you will say, the Lord showed me how to trust when I thought the whole world was over. And you're still here, right? Yeah. Hey, let's give him a hand for... Thank you, buddy. You bet. You bet. When you look at what happened to the people in Psalm 107, everything was going awful, and then they cried out, it says in verse 28. It said they cried out, and the Lord delivered them. And what I would say to you, based on Cole Warren's testimony and the testimony of hundreds of you in the room, I would say to you this: don't spurn the storm. Don't spurn the storm. Don't detest the storm. Don't hate the storm so bad that all you do is batten down the hatches and hold on till the rain quits, because unless you lift your eyes to wherefore comes your help, you're not going to see it. You have got to lift your head. Don't hate the storm. You might have to endure the storm, but don't hate the storm. Because it's only in the crisis that we see that God's discipline has direction, or God's redemption. It may not be discipline. It might not have anything to do with discipline at all. You know, I love what Jesus, when they brought the blind kid to him, and they said, Master, who sinned, the parents or the boy, that, you know, this kid was born blind? And he said, nobody sinned. It's life. Brokenness from the fall in the garden. Life brings sin. I mean, you know, we're all touched by it. There's no way out. And it says they cried out. When it happened, what did they do? What did they do? They were at their wits' end. And when you can't fix it and your talent can't change it, what do? You cry out. You cry out, because we see the deliverance is always tied to dependence every time. Every time. Who does he fill? We've talked about it for 4 weeks. In verse 9, who does God meet? Who does he fill? Who does he engage? He has satisfied who? The thirsty soul, the desperate soul, the hungry soul. He has filled with what is good, verse 9 says. That's who he fills. He fills the people that cry out. That's who he fills. He fills those that are desperate. That's who he changes. I want to share with you one other key truth about what to do when crisis comes, and it's this. Never forget that God uses storms to sanctify, to make holy. That's what you just heard from an 18-year-old young man. God uses storms to sanctify. He will do it. He'll do it because of his great love. It says they cried out in verse 28. They cried out what? In their trouble. And it says he brought them out of their distresses. Now, I love what it says, and there's a lot here, you guys. Look in verse 29. He causes the storm to be still so that the waves of the sea were hushed. And they were very glad because they were quiet. And he guided them to a desired haven. He guided them. But look at what it says in verse 29. They cried out, and what happened? He caused the storm to be still. Do you realize they weren't in a port? They weren't tied to a dock. They were out on the ocean. They had nowhere to go, no anchor to drop, no tree to tie their boat to, nothing to wrap the cord around. They were going to die, and God did not. This is interesting to me. What do you think normally? What is that old cliche? Any port in a storm? There was no port. Either God was going to come through or they were going to die. So you know what he gave them? He gave them himself. That's what he gave them. When crisis comes, he gives you himself. What did Jesus save us from? Jesus saved us from us, didn't he? He didn't just save us from sin. He saved us from ourselves. And that's what we see. It carries all throughout God's redemption story, from Genesis to Revelation, that God saved them from themselves. They had nowhere else to go. Verse 29, he brought calm. He brought calm. He calmed the storm. He hushed the waves. Now, don't miss the time, the domino effect. Don't miss the flow. He calmed the storm. And then in verse 30, look what it says. Then they were glad. Joy returned. Why? Because they were quiet. And then he guided them to a port. See, because what happens, friends, is when you just go running back to a port, it's really easy to say, oh, good, we found a safe place to land. It's really easy to say, man, the storm came into our lives and we found the best boat and we're able to tie off to a dock. But when you can't tie off to anything and God's all you've got, that's what he did. To show them, listen to me, he showed them you don't need a port when you know the harbor master. You don't need a port in the storm when you know the God that owns the weather. Are you with me? You don't need a dock when you know the God of all creation, because he can speak to the waves and they'll be calm. And that's what he did. He gave them himself, and that's what God saves us from. He saves us from ourselves. When crisis comes, you better learn to cry out, because it's the only thing that's going to deliver you.